Looking at Americas before Columbus. So what was the Americas like before 1492? So I call this 1491 Silence History. And if you saw my video about the production of history, one aspect that is often dropped from history books is this story. For different reasons, but I think it's important, even in a 6-week class, to tie in and show what was the Americas like before 1492. And then that adds in a legacy and an important story that still is with us today. So when you're looking at that, there's a few terms I want to show that I like to use. Holberg's mistake, niche specialization, and if you're in my World Civ, I mentioned that there as well. And Cahokia, which you saw in your readings, and Chinampas. There's some different technology that comes about with before 1492 with civilizations in both North, South, and Central America. That's worth noting. Now, one thing you can kind of ask, and if you see the video, I put it there as sort of a debate so you can kind of see how people use the imagery, the stereotype, the pop culture image in movies and in Facebook of Native American peoples in the Americas. So what image do you come up with? What do you see? Well, you might see mascots, right? So there's different mascots that people have. Here in England even, there's a rugby team that won the Premier Rugby League here in Exeter where I live, and guess what their name is? They are the Chiefs, and they have tomahawks and do the war drums and all that. Now, you could talk about cultural appropriation, but here in England, but that happens in the Americas and the United States as well still today. So, important thing to kind of keep in mind. So, what about Native Americans before 1492? Whatever pop image you have, for better or for worse, of the stoic Indian on a horse roaming the plains, that would not have been the case before 1492 and before Columbian exchange anyway, would it? There wasn't any horses. Yes, arguably there was horses in the Americas long thousands of years ago, but those were all mostly extinct before the culture that we're talking about here. There was camels, there was all kinds of big animals that were Amerindians did hunt to extinction, or they were killed for other reasons. But before 1492, what did the native peoples of Americas look like, and what were they like? Well, there was one guy named Alan Holberg who was an anthropologist, and during World War I in 1941 to 1943, right in the middle of World War II, Alan Holberg went to Bolivia, and he went to the Soriano people, who he believed were outside of Western influence. These were very natives of South America. They were away from urbanization, they were away from technology, they lived the old lifestyle. Now, the problem with what he saw is what I call the Holberg mistake. Before Columbus, what he wrote, that he said that both before Columbus, so before 1492, both the peoples in the land of Americas had no real history. Peoples of the Americas floated changelessly through the millennia until 1492. Only after interaction with Europe and the rest of the world did their history really begin. Now, there's Levi-Strauss, is a historian who writes the same thing about Africa. Holberg says Americas have no history. A lot of people say that. A lot of textbooks and way people teach American history and history in the Western Hemisphere tend to go with this view. So what he's saying is, he's saying there's no history because the people he was looking at, Soriano people, he'd stayed with them for 3 years, and he said these people are devastated. They're sickly. It's horrible. Well, what he didn't know, what he didn't keep in mind, was during World War II, Bolivia was expanding. They were a main supplier of beef to the Allied armies, and were actually going into Soriano land deep in the rainforest here, starting to clear out their area, clear out the people to make more room for their cattle. Right before that, or right after Bolivia government started doing that, that is when Alan Holberg went to these people. So he was living with a people that had just been attacked. He didn't understand their language. He didn't understand why they were so a lot of people were dead because of the Bolivian government moving them, hit with disease. Their way of life was disrupted, and he thought that's how they were always living. And he thought, well, this is what it was like before Columbus. Then thank God that that Columbus came, and thank God the Europeans came. And there's been a lot of views like that, but is that accurate? Think about the idea of the noble savage. You see this in film a lot. You see this, as much as I love the movie Pocahontas, you see it there, you see it in other ones. It's the mythical conception of people belonging to non-European groups and having innate connection to the land, right? So that they just kind of float around the land, not really changing it, not really acting part of it, but just kind of there. So not really being part of a history, just floating around the land. And that's sort of the same idea Alan Holberg had. That Alan Holberg said there wasn't really much happening in the Americas until Europeans started to change. Well, you saw in chapter 1 that's not the case. You saw that there was a lot of stuff happening, that there was historical agency, that there was active players in history creating change, creating civilizations long before 1492. And so we looked at Aztec culture, we looked at Mexica culture, we looked at the Incas, we saw even before all that, we saw the Clovis culture, right? Where you see these, what we would look at as arrowheads and all these different things with the Clovis culture throughout North America. Mississippi Valley they were producing all kinds of farming implements and things that were found as far as modern-day California, showing trade networks across what is now the whole United States, really. There was trade networks from North to South America. There was trade networks all over the place, creating massive interaction and change. So, also another aspect of this that our textbook doesn't go into too much that's worth looking at is modern day DNA research has able to show racial minority groups in Japan sharing DNA with the Blackfeet, the Sioux, Cherokee Indians, and actually some other tribes. So what does that tell us about people migration? Linguistics, linguists are looking at language similarities. And if you look at some of the ancient Basque languages, Basque is still a very big language here in Europe, French-Spanish borderlands there in the Pyrenees mountain range. But the Basque language shares a lot of cognates, a lot of foundation words with lots of Native American languages. The Aleutians, the Eskimos, the Inuits, they all share cognates with the Finnish-speaking people. So if you look at different cross-discipline ways of looking at the Americas, you start to see this normal view, which our textbook talks about, going across the Bering Strait, the Siberian Strait, across the Bering Strait, and from North Siberia across to Alaska, into America, finally reaching South America around 9000 BCE. That is the traditional narrative that is being upset when you look at that people might have been coming from as far as Europe and beyond, coming this direction, coming east. So that changes everything, and it changes cultures. You see the rise of Clovis culture with all these different arrowheads and spear straightening implements and tools, and different types of spears to get large game, and traps, and all this stuff to create different cultures. All this is what I like to call niche specialization, where people have the ability to learn, adapt, to create new things, and be innovative. And they did that with the Clovis culture, and they did that after. This picture here, now what do you see here? This is the Inuit people, modern day Inuits. And you're starting to see what? You see that they are adapting to the land here, aren't they? Same thing happening thousands of years ago. See what's around them, see what environmental factors they need to both keep them warm, to keep them caloric intake so that they have food in their bellies, that they have shelter, and they start to change. Now, this is obviously also showing that there might be migrant type peoples moving from place to place rather than settling into one area. But that's not the same across the world and across the Americas. One thing to keep in mind in all my classes is how people start to settle down, right? In our world history, we talk about Neolithic cultures, when people start to settle down and start to harvest the land, start to domesticate plants and animals. And this map you start to see, because of the environmental situation around them, people adapting, innovating, and start to use the food, use the animals around them, and start to be in one place. Now, isn't this interesting? If you look at this, here's the Mississippi Valley region that we talked about with the society emerging. What's here? Yeah, we have the Meshka, we have the Aztecs coming about here, the Incas, right? We have African culture here giving rise, that we talk about a bit in my world history. The Mesopotamia, all these regions, because of settling down, start to create complex societies, the same as in the Americas. And that is often forgot and looked at. Your picture in this from your textbook shows this man using both farming and planting seeds, using irrigation, using floating gardens, the chinampas that we talked about, yielding 2, 3, some people even say 4 harvests a year. Well, so by the time Europeans start to interact with native peoples in the Americas and start to see this is far beyond any advanced technology in farming than anywhere in Europe. That's for sure, by far. And able to, hydroponic gardening way before anybody's doing it today for other types of gardening in the houses and so forth. These markets that look not much different to a market that we have today, going into a wonderful supermarket or going to a farmer's market or something, and trading goods across the peoples in the Americas. And luxury goods, gold, silver. They used feathers, and they had feathers, and they were hollow, and they were able to fill them with gold dust or silver and have certain lengths of them, and it was a way to have a currency with different lengths and standardized currency that way. So they did that. Cotton cloaks and chocolate and all these different things was part of this culture.